and Meghan documentary. And after years of speculation, we got to hear their side of the story, relationship, and also what happens beyond.
The moment came without warning.
It started with a single envelope, cream-colored and sealed with wax, carried through a side entrance of Buckingham Palace by a courier who had been told only that it was urgent and that it must reach the Duchess of Fairclough by nightfall. No one in the household knew what it said. No one, except the woman who had written it 3,000 miles away, believed it would change anything. But it did. The Duchess of Fairclough, born Eleanor, though the tabloids had long since reduced her to a single, weaponized syllable, Nell, read the letter alone in her sitting room. She read it twice. Then she folded it along its original creases, set it on the table beside her, and sat very still for a long moment, the way people do when they are deciding not what to feel, but what to do with what they already feel. The letter was from Isabel, once a member of the family by marriage, now living an ocean away in a life she had built out of the wreckage of the one she'd left behind. Isabel's letter did not ask for forgiveness outright. It was cleverer than that. It asked for one honest conversation, just between us, before everything becomes permanent. It asked Eleanor to remember what they had once been to each other, before the interviews, before the statements issued through lawyers, before the years of silence had calcified into something that looked, from the outside, like hatred. Eleanor did not think it was hatred. She thought it was exhaustion. She had loved Isabel once, in the uncomplicated way you love a new sister, someone who arrives in your family as a stranger and, for a while, feels like a gift. They had laughed together at state dinners neither of them wanted to attend. They had traded knowing looks across rooms full of protocol. And then, slowly, unmistakably, something had broken. Not in one moment, but in 100 small ones. A private conversation that appeared, reworded but recognizable, in a magazine profile, a shared confidence that resurfaced in a memoir, a family disagreement that became, somehow, a public referendum on which of them was the real victim. By the time Isabel left the family entirely, publicly, dramatically, with interviews that named names and painted portraits, Eleanor had stopped being able to tell which version of events was true. She only knew that trust, once treated as a bargaining chip, stopped being trust at all. Her husband, Prince Thomas, found her still sitting with the letter when he came in from a meeting with the household office. He didn't need to ask what had happened. He could see it in the particular stillness of her shoulders, the way she held her hands folded in her lap like someone bracing for impact that had already arrived. "She wrote to you," he said. "Not a question. She wants to talk." Before things become, Eleanor paused, searching for Isabel's word. Permanent. Thomas sat across from her. He had spent years learning when to speak and when to simply be present, and this was, he sensed, a moment for the latter. But Eleanor wanted his voice, not his silence. "What do you want to do?" he asked finally. "I want to say yes," Eleanor admitted. "That's the humiliating part. Some small, stupid part of me still wants to be the bigger person, to prove that I can rise above it, that I'm not the cold one everyone thinks I am." She looked at him. "But I don't think this is really about rising above anything. I think it's about control. If I answer, even kindly, it becomes a door. And doors, once opened, don't stay open on your terms." Thomas didn't try to talk her out of the feeling or into it. "You've thought about this longer than today," he said. "I've thought about it for years," Eleanor said. "I just didn't think I'd have to decide it in an afternoon." What Eleanor knew, and what made this letter so much harder to dismiss than the others that had come before it, was that Isabel wasn't naive. Isabel understood exactly what a single reply, however brief, however carefully worded, would mean to the outside world. A response, even a cool one, would be read as an opening. It would be dissected, printed, turned into headlines suggesting reconciliation was underway, that old wounds were healing, that perhaps the family had been wrong all along to let things end the way they had. And if that story took hold, and then nothing followed, no further contact, no grand reunion, it would be Eleanor who looked cruel for raising hopes and dashing them. There was no version of a small kindness that stayed small. She thought of her children, still young enough to be shielded from most of it, but not so young that they wouldn't eventually read every article ever written about their family. She thought about the version of this story she wanted them to inherit. Not a saga of grudges and public wounds, but a quieter lesson that you can care about someone's pain without agreeing to let it reorganize your life. She thought, too, about the last time she and Isabel had spoken face-to-face, nearly 2 years earlier in a private room at Thornfield House. That conversation had started gently and ended with Isabel asking her to publicly support a joint statement, one that would have implied the family bore equal responsibility for the rupture. Eleanor had refused, gently but completely, and had said something she still remembered clearly. "I won't let something that hurt both of us become a tool for either of us." Isabel's face had changed in that moment. Not with anger, but with the particular disappointment of someone who realizes their strategy has been recognized for exactly what it is. That memory, more than anything else, was why this new letter didn't move her the way it might have once. Later that evening, Eleanor called for her private secretary, a steady, unflappable woman named Margaret who had worked for 3 different members of the family and had long since stopped being surprised by anything a letter could contain. "I won't be responding," Eleanor said simply. "Not with a call, not with a note, not with anything that could be photographed, quoted, or leaked in 6 months as proof of anything." Margaret nodded. "And if she writes again?" "Then she writes again," Eleanor said. "But my answer doesn't change based on how many times the question is asked." It wasn't cruelty. Margaret, watching her, understood that clearly. It was the specific, hard-won calm of a woman who had already grieved a relationship and had decided not to let the grieving be reopened for someone else's narrative. Isabel, across the ocean, waited 3 days for a reply that never came. She had told herself she wasn't expecting much. A line, even a cold one, would have been something. But the silence, when it settled in fully, felt different from rejection. Rejection could be argued with. Silence gave her nothing to push against. Her husband, Julian, watched her set her phone down for the final time that week and understood, without needing to be told, that something had ended. Not loudly. Not with a headline. Just with the particular finality of nothing happening at all. "She's not going to answer," Isabel said. "Do you wish you hadn't sent it?" Julian asked gently. Isabel considered this for a long moment. "No," she said. "I think I needed to know for certain. Now I know." There was no dramatic confrontation, no public statement, no interview clarifying what had happened. The story, if it ever became public at all, would likely arrive the way most quiet endings do, through a vague mention in a royal correspondence column, a line or two suggesting that sources close to the family believed a final door had closed. The truth, messier and more human than any headline could hold, was simpler. 2 women who had once tried to be family to each other had run out of road, not through cruelty, but through the slow accumulation of moments where trust had been spent instead of protected. The story did surface eventually, though not the way either woman had feared. A royal correspondent, working from a single unnamed source, wrote a short piece speculating that a final attempt at private reconciliation had gone unanswered. It ran on page 9, not the front page, and by the following week it had been replaced by newer, louder stories about someone else entirely. There was no photograph of a slammed door, no dramatic quote, no anonymous aide describing tears in a private room. Just a paragraph, quickly forgotten by everyone except the 2 women who had lived it. Eleanor read the piece once, standing in the palace library with a cup of tea going cold in her hand. She noted, with a kind of tired relief, that the writer had gotten the broad shape of it right without ever knowing the real weight behind it. That felt, in its own way, like a mercy. Some stories, she had come to believe, were not meant to be public property. This one, at least, had mostly stayed hers. She thought about writing back to Isabel after all, not to reopen anything, but simply to say that she hoped, sincerely, that Isabel found the peace she seemed to be searching for. She drafted the message twice in her head and never once put it on paper. Not because she didn't mean it, but because she had learned slowly and at some cost that meaning something and being safe to say it were not always the same thing. Some kindnesses, offered at the wrong moment, cost more than the silence they were meant to replace. Margaret, tidying papers in the next room, glanced in once, and saw the Duchess, simply standing there, quiet and unhurried, the tea forgotten. She didn't ask what Eleanor was thinking. Some silences, she had learned working in that house, were not meant to be filled. Months later, Eleanor would think back on that letter only rarely, and without the drama the moment itself had seemed to demand. She had not slammed a door. She had simply stopped propping one open that both of them, if they were honest, had already walked through. Tomas asked her once, long after, whether she regretted the silence. "I regret that it had to be this way," Eleanor said. "I don't regret choosing it. There is a particular kind of strength that looks, from a distance, like coldness, the strength required to let something end quietly instead of relitigating it forever." Eleanor had learned that peace, real peace, rarely arrives with fanfare. More often, it looks like an unanswered letter, folded neatly, and a woman who has decided, finally, that her compassion does not have to come at the cost of her peace.